starts at 7 o'clock. So this is where we get a lot of our people coming in. So I will be going back and forth of accepting people into the meeting as well as, talking to everyone. So don't mind me.
All right.
But I'm going to start saying hi to everyone. So welcome everyone to this month's meeting. My name is Brian Fan. I'm the president of American Cetacean Society Monterey Bay chapter. If you haven't met me yet, here you go. And if you have, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have this month's meeting with Stephen, talking about his findings and research about gray whales from the lagoons of Baja California. So something that I know a lot of you are interested because we have a lot of these gray whales still or passing by last month or so. And then right now I've heard a couple sightings of moms and calves. So maybe they're still passing by, but it's kind of rare for us right now of people actually spotting the moms and calves. If you're new here and do not know what we're about, we host monthly meetings about whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and other critters within the marine ecosystem. So welcome to our meetings. If you want more information, feel free to sign up for our emails. It's free on our website at acsmb.org. Once again, it's acsmb.org. And then also think about becoming a member for our society on our website. This allows you to be updated on everything that we're doing, as well as our upcoming events with our researchers or the researchers that are so kind to come and speak with us. So I'm gonna have to ask everyone for your help today. So if you want us to help us continue having our meetings and believe what we're doing in here with our meetings, feel free to donate online, $5 to $10 or whatever you feel like donating. It helps us kind of continue in doing what we're passionate about, and that's informing you as well as having our meetings with our researchers. Your donation also helps us fund grants to local students within the Monterey Bay area. So I know that we have someone from Hopkins Marine Station that was looking at marine microplastics that go through baleen and what type of plastics can go through and if they do filter it. And that was one of our last research grants that we've given out. So your donations help us fund a lot of our students that are in the area. So feel free to help us out. Anything and everything does help. And then I also love to talk about what is happening in the Monterey Bay right now when it comes to sightings, and it's humpbacks. Lots and lots of humpback whales have been sighting coming into the Monterey Bay. And I love seeing them right now because they're skinny. That's just how it is when it comes to seeing these humpback whales. They're skinny, and then in a couple months, if you want to see the exact same animals, they're big, they're massive, they've gained up that blubber layer, and it's fun to see. So they're out there right now feeding. It's 7 o'clock right now. I know it's 9 o'clock for Stephen, close to 10 o'clock, but they're still out there feeding, and they're coming in big numbers. So come out and look for some whales. If you're from shore, look out and you'll see them. I live here in Marina, and I saw them a couple days ago right off the beach. And for everyone else, feel free to jump onto a boat and look at these giant animals feeding at the anchovies and sardines right at the surface. I've been seeing some amazing footage of just amazing animals. Humpbacks are my favorite. Sorry, rambling on. But I do love gray whales as well, and that's why Stephen is here talking about his research. So let me introduce Stephen. So Stephen Swartz is a graduate from University of California, Santa Cruz, and has researched and published widely on gray whales and their breeding lagoons in Baja California. From 1977 to 1982, Stephen and Mary Lou Jones conducted the first systematic research of gray whales in Laguna San Ignacio in Baja California Sur, Mexico. In 2006, along with Jorge Urban R, Stephen founded the Laguna San Ignacio Ecosystem Science Program to support and encourage science-based research and monitoring of gray whales and their breeding aggregation lagoon areas in Baja. He has also served as a consultant to the Mexican government Ministry of Environment, National Resources, Fisheries, and worked for the Ocean Conservancy, the U.S. Marine Mammal Commission, the National Marine Fisheries Service, and the International Whaling Commission. Stephen retired from the federal service in 2011 and now works as a consultant and senior scientist for non-government environmental marine conservation organizations. And without further ado, let me introduce and get Stephen to start his amazing talk.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that very much. Those are very kind words. And I would like to add my welcome to everyone who's tuning in this evening to the program. Bienvenidos a todos en Mexico también. So with any further ado, I will share my screen and get on with the show, as they say. Okay. Am I up? Can everybody see me or see the screen?
Yes, beautiful.
Okay, good. Well, this is this evening's presentation. We're going to talk about gray whales, one of my favorite topics and favorite animals. What I've done is organize this presentation to cover a lot of ground, and we'll cover it at one level, and then if there are questions afterwards, we can go and dig deeper if we'd like. First, I'll talk about our program, the Laguna San Ignacio Ecosystem Science Program, who we are and what we do. And then we'll do a quick review of gray whale natural history and their migrations, which play an important role in what we do. Many of you will be familiar with it, but we'll review it. And then we'll talk about what our research is teaching us about gray whales, the things we learned since 2006 when we started this program. And then we'll dip into the unusual mortality events that are occurring now and have occurred previously to the population of gray whales in the North Pacific, and how the research in the lagoons is helping us to monitor and to understand the effects of these UMEs, or unusual mortality events, on the population. And then we'll try and project forward on the prognosis of the future and see what's in store for the gray whales as they move on. As Brian noted, Mary Lou and I started the first systematic studies of gray whales in Laguna San Ignacio, the winters of 1977 to 82. And then we went off back to university to finish our graduate degrees. And there was a hiatus there, but in 1995, Professor Jorge Urban from the Autonomous University of Baja California Sur in La Paz resumed the gray whale monitoring and studies in Laguna San Ignacio from 95 to 2003. This is the period of time when there was a proposal to turn San Ignacio Lagoon into a salt plant, basically a solar wind powered salt plant like there is in Guerrero Negro to the north of Laguna San Ignacio. But that conflicted with the biosphere reserve that had just been established, of which the lagoon is part. And eventually the decision was made not to develop a salt plant there. And so it became a natural wildlife area and an ecotourism destination. Then in 2009, we joined the Ocean Foundation family of marine advocacy and research programs. And the Ocean Foundation is a Washington, DC based nonprofit, non-governmental nonprofit ocean research and advocacy organization, and they do a lot of great things. And I encourage you to go to their website and browse around. You'll find lots of interesting things there. So we established the current program, the San Ignacio Ecosystem Science Program, in 2006. Our mission was basically to provide science-based information on the status of gray whales and other marine life in support of conservation and protection of Laguna San Ignacio, and later we added Bahia Magdalena to the south. Secondly, we wanted to have an opportunity to prepare new generations of marine scientists and up-and-coming conservationists. So we drew upon the university communities for our colleague researchers with different disciplines, everything from ichthyology to birds, to marine plankton, to acoustics, and their students to come to the lagoon and do their thesis work there. And that has worked out extremely well. And we believe firmly that basically to educate and empower the public and local residents is one of the strongest measures you can, or steps you can take toward ensuring conservation of marine protected areas such as the lagoons in Baja California. Our workforce of researchers, as I mentioned, are our colleagues, the professors and instructors at universities in Mexico and elsewhere, in North America and in Europe and in Central America. And then all their students that do their thesis work at the lagoon, mostly on whales, but on other topics as well. As of 2021, we've had, our students have completed 9 bachelor's degrees, 7 master's degrees, and 6 PhDs. And we've still got a bunch more still in the oven waiting to finish up. All right, let's review gray whale biology. There's found in the Northern Pacific. On the eastern side is the largest group of gray whales. It's called the Eastern North Pacific population. It's approximately 21,500 individuals at this point in time. On the opposite side, there's a Western North Pacific population that's been depleted and has been critically endangered for many, many years. And it's found on the coast of the Russia and Japan, Korea, and China. It's a very small group. The two populations do mix along the Kamchatka Peninsula and in the northern Bering Sea. And we'll talk a bit about that as we get further into the presentation. Back to the Eastern North Pacific, there's a subgroup called the Pacific Northwest Feeding Group that doesn't seem to migrate north to the feeding grounds in the north. They seem to hang out in the Puget Sound area. And they've been looking at those. John Kalambakidis and the Cascadia Research Collective has been watching those animals and studying them for many, many years, and they learned quite a bit about this subgroup of gray whales. So every spring, the whales leave their southern range or winter range, and they migrate along the coast of North America and then disperse through the Aleutian Islands over the continental shelf to the various feeding areas where the shallow shelf waters host a variety of marine invertebrates that blanket the bottom, primarily amphipods, but there are other invertebrates that the whales feed on. And they spend all summer with those long, long days in the higher in latitudes, 24/7 daylight, feeding and growing quite fat on all of the food that is available for them up there. In the fall, they reverse that as the days get shorter and the days get darker and the weather gets colder. They reverse their route and they gather and move out of the northern seas and migrate back down along the coast of North America to their winter breeding range, which is along the coast of Southern California from Point Conception through the Channel Islands all the way down into Baja California. And in some years, they'll even go into the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California during the winter months. Now, for this discussion, we're going to talk about the 3 primary aggregation and breeding areas in Mexico. The northernmost is Laguna Ojo de Liebre. It's also known as Scammons Lagoon. And the bay out in front of it is the Vizcaíno Bay. And this is the largest reserve or gathering area that the gray whales have along the Baja Peninsula. And it has usually the highest density of whales during the winter months outside in the bay and also in the interior of the lagoon. In the middle is Laguna San Ignacio. It's second in the abundance of whales that frequent there. And the bay out in front is called Ballenas Bay. It was named that by Captain Charles Scammon, those of you that are history buffs, when he discovered that there were a lot of whales there. And unfortunately, he led the charge with that period of 19th century whaling along the Baja California coast that depleted the population. The southernmost aggregation area is the Bahia Magdalena complex. It's a large inland water way with estuaries and mangrove marshes and swamps to the north and to the south at Villa Almejas. And the whales move in and use basically the entire area during the winter months as an aggregation area and a place to congregate for breeding. One of our primary activities is to monitor the number of whales that are using both San Ignacio Lagoon and Bahia Magdalena. And we do this using an open panga, a boat. Those of you that have visited the lagoon will recognize the open panga. This is the same type of boat that is used by the whale watchers, the ecotourism whale watchers that come to the lagoons every winter to view the whales. And the reason we selected this boat is because the whales become quite comfortable with the presence of these small outboard motor powered boats. And it allows us to mingle with the whales. They're not afraid of this type of boat. Usually everyone's, waving at them and taking their pictures. We're actually looking at them, counting them, and also taking their pictures. So in San Ignacio Lagoon, we run a line transect, or a survey of the entire lagoon. The deep water is in the center of this 30-kilometer long finger of seawater that goes into the Vizcaíno Desert. And we follow a GPS track line so we can repeat the course every time we do it. And we count the whales to the left and to the right as we pass them. And at the end of the survey, we have an estimate of the number of whales that are in the lagoon on that particular day. And this gives us an index of the population and how many whales are utilizing that lagoon each winter. The data looks something like this. What we have here are a plot of the counts, the census counts, or we call them the survey counts, from 2016 to this past year, 2021. And you can see the type of data that we have. And we learn a lot of information. These are all single whales, okay? No mother and calf pairs in this particular data set. And you can see that if we look on the left-hand side at the bottom, it shows the arrival times. The red line, the horizontal red line, shows the 50 count, 50 animals. And we can see that in 2016 and 2017, it occurred it occurred at least 3 to 4 weeks earlier than it did in the next years, 2018 through 2021. So there's been about a 2-week delay in recent times of the arrival of the single whales to the lagoon. Why it's taking them longer to get there, we're not sure, but we learned that from these counts. The high counts are similar at the peak of the season, which is the end of February, beginning of March each winter. We'll have between 100 and 200 single whales occupying San Ignacio Lagoon. Basically, their activity there is to breed. Males and females are all mixed, the females that don't have calves, that is. And they're breeding for the next season, the next winter, the females will give birth to a new calf. We also see that the departure dates up until 2021, this past year, were about the same. They all bail out by the end of March, the first week in April. But for a reason yet we can't quite understand at this point, this year, the whales hung around longer in the lagoon, about a week longer than they had the previous 3 winters. So this is an example of the kind of information we can look at, not only the numbers of animals that are visiting the lagoon to get a minimum estimate of the utilization of the lagoon by the whales, but also the timing of their arrival, the peak of their season, and if it shifts from year to year, and then their departure times. So little by little, by looking at the whales, we're learning more about their use of the utilization of these aggregation and breeding areas in Baja California. The next very important tool is photographic identification, and this has been around for a long time with many species of whales. Humpback flukes are famous for this because of their individual markings. Well, by photographing the back of the gray whale, the dorsal ridge area, we look at those permanent markings from year to year, and it allows us to determine the duration of stay of individuals in the lagoons, the fidelity of individuals coming back to the same place. For breeding females, how often they have a calf, their movements among areas and their minimum age, all coming from just taking digital photographs. So let me give you some examples. These are right side identification, so there's no confusion if we don't have both the left and right side, although we try to get pictures of both the left and right side of each individual that we photograph. On the left, you can see we start with the year 2005. It was our first photo ID season of the program, running up to last year, 2020. And we can see that we photographed 6,350 single whales during that time period. Mother calf pairs or female calf pairs, we've got 2,100 and a few extras. And in total adults, which would be everybody but the calves, there's over 8,487 individual whales that we photographed and put into catalogs for photographic identification analyses. And here's the kinds of things we're learning. One, the blue bar on the left of the number of individuals are the mothers with calves, and the orange bar are the solid single whales, the singles. And this tells us how many interannual recaptures we see of these two groups of animals. And we can see that in two-year recaptures, seeing them at least 2 years, they're about equal. And then at 3 years, the singles are falling off and the mother calf pairs, female calf pairs start to predominate. By the 4th year of recapture, we're seeing fewer singles and so on. And so if we look over here to the right, we see that individuals with greater than 2 recaptures of females with calves, we've got 445 of 1,300 or 34% of those animals compared to singles. These are both males and females without calves. Only 281 of 3,000 and 146, or only 9% of those animals are recaptured. So this tells us right away that the females are coming back to San Ignacio Lagoon and the other aggregation areas more frequently than the single whales do. We see them more often. We're able to get more pictures of them. And this sort of explains what's going on here. If we look at the year, this on the left from 2009 to 2020, we see in the blue there, the females with calves, the average number of days that a female with a calf for each of those years is running, 32.4 in 2009. There's a high of 2011 of 38.6 days, and so on, 35. About a month or a little more than a month is the typical stay of a female with a calf. The maximum days females with calves can range as high as 3 months. Some of the females with calves that come back to San Ignacio Lagoon, we've seen the entire winter season, all 3 months and even longer sometimes. Compare that now to the right, the pink box with the single whales. We see that the average number of days that a single whale is in the lagoon is a lot shorter, like 16.3 days in 2011, ranging as though at the highest in the whole time period. It's more like a week. A week to 10 days is as long as a single whale is around to be photographed. There's a maximum days. Some of them get quite high, like the females with calves. And we believe some of those might be even single females that lost their calf and they're still hanging around the lagoon, even though they've either unsuccessfully birthed a calf or they lost it for one reason at a time. So there's the discrepancy right there, is the single whales spend the least amount of time in these aggregation and breeding areas. They're there to mate and to breed. They're not there to take care of a newborn calf, whereas the females with calves are. And so they kind of dig in and hang around for a while to give that calf a chance to grow and get strong before it starts its first migration north to the summer feeding range. Well, females with calves are obviously a big interest to us because that's the core of the population. That's the future as far as the health of the breeding stock. And so we started looking at females that we photographed when Mary Lou and I first went to the lagoon in 1977 through 82. And here's an example of a minimum age estimation to tell us, which are the elder females, or how old are the females that are doing all the breeding. So if you look at that bar across the center here, this first female was photographed by Mary Lou and I with a calf in 1977, and then as a single whale in 78, and again with a calf in 79, and 80 as a single, and 81 with a calf, and then 82 single, and then some colleagues of ours working in the lagoon in 83 photographed her again with a calf. But then we didn't see her because there was no research going on until the program started again in 2006, 2007. And so 2008, the whale was photographed again as a mother with a calf, in 2010 as a single, 2012 with a single, and so on and so forth until the most recent sighting of this individual female was in 2019. So if we do a little math and we assume that these females had to be at least 6 to 8 years to be reproductively mature and able to birth a calf, and then add the 42 years between the first photograph of her and the most recent photograph of her, we're looking at a female that's somewhere between 48 and 50 years old. And she's still alive, she's still reproductively active, and she's still coming back to Laguna San Ignacio. So this tells us a lot about the reproductive potential and history of individual females, but also their fidelity to come back to a place that apparently they're comfortable with year after year. Takes us to the breeding cycle. The classic or traditional breeding cycle for gray whales is 2 years. A female will breed with a male in one winter. She'll then migrate north in the spring to feed all summer long, return the following winter to birth that calf, should then stay with that calf and take it northward on its first migration north, and then wean it somewhere at the age between 7 and 9 months. The calf and the mom will separate. So it's a classic 2-year cycle. And if we look at the top, if I can use a pointer here, here's a couple of examples. We had a photograph of this animal in this first year, and then 2 years later, it birthed a calf. And here's another one, classic sample. Sometimes they'll go longer than 2 years. This animal birthed a calf. First year, 2 years running, it was seen without a calf as a single. And then on the 4th year, since the birth, it was birthed as the 3-year cycle. And then sometimes there'll be even longer periods of time. They'll birth a calf, and then they'll go 3 or more years before we see the animal again with another calf. So all of the factors that affect the calving rate of females, or the reproductive rate of females, has a lot to influence the population growth and the population vitality. Mary Lou did an analysis of the calving interval during the period of time when we were there in 77 to 82. And she calculated, based on 60 individual females that she was watching throughout those years, that every 2¼ years was the average birth interval for females at that point in time, between 77 and 82. Diaz then took another sample. This was during, just following a mortality event, which we'll talk about later, 96 to 2002. And she saw that based on a smaller sample, that the calving interval had gone up to 2.4 years from the 2.25 that Mary Lou had calculated. And then the most recent estimate that we have is the data set from 2005 to 2017, where the calving rate has come down a little bit, 2.39 years, but that's based on a much larger sample of 365 individual whales that were watched. We currently have data through 2021, and we've got some of our researchers, some of our students at the universities working on updating these data. So we'll see if that calving interval has continued to come down and approach the classic 2-year cycle, or if it's still much greater than 2.5 years. One of the most spectacular things about the photo ID matching was the international effort to see if the Western population, the depleted population on the Western Pacific side, was mixing or interchanging and interacting with the Eastern North Pacific population on the Eastern side. And the first hint of this was some radio tagging done by Bruce Mate of Oregon State University and his colleagues, and working with some Russian researchers. They put some radio tags on some of the Western, what were called the Russian whales that feed off Sakhalin Island and Kamchatka. And they expected those animals to go south along the Asian coast and to historical breeding and calving areas at latitudes similar to Baja California, but off of China. Well, they didn't. The radio tagged whales went east and joined the northeastern Pacific population migration down North America and ended up in Baja California. So that started a massive effort to look at all the photo ID catalogs available for Baja and for the Western population. And as of 2018, we photographically matched 51 individuals that have been photographed in both the Western and the Eastern Baja California parts of the gray whales range. So it clearly shows that there is an interaction between the Western gray whales, or what have been known as Western gray whales, and some of the Northeastern. This also includes females that are breeding. They're migrating to North America, going down to Baja, breeding with males down there, and then migrating back over the spring and summer to the Russian and coast on the western side of the Pacific. So this raises a question about how what remains of the original Western gray whale population. The genetics tell us that there still are, if you want to call it pedigreed or pure gray whales from the Western population, but it also shows that there's been mixed breeding between the two populations. So we're looking at a situation where perhaps the Northeastern population, the larger, more successful population, is now repopulating former range and mixing with the Western population. Again, all this comes from digital photography. Okay, so now unusual mortality events. There was one that occurred at the turn of the century, 1999 to 2000, and then again starting in 2019 and 2021, we had a second mortality event, which is currently still underway. This is first reported by NOAA Fisheries on their webpage, and there's a part of the Marine Mammal Protection Act triggers a response when strandings of any marine mammals occur more than the background levels or the historical levels. And so a working group of experts is assembled, and they start trying to investigate and find out what's going on with the mortality event. In 2019 and 2020, the first year of this event, whales were stranding throughout the range of the northeastern Pacific gray whale, from Baja California, Mexico, along the US coast, the Canadian coast, all through Alaska, and up into the feeding range in the northern higher latitudes. These were all age and sex classes of whales, not just calves of the year, which was always some mortality, but that included juveniles and adult whales in all of the stranded animals that were examined. The totals for 2019 were 214 animals were discovered. In 2020, 174. And in 2021 right now, which is a work in progress because the animals are still, as Brian mentioned, still passing by Central California and going north and getting up to the summer feeding grounds. There are only 70 at this point in time, but unfortunately, we'll probably find some more of them as the migrations continue. Now, these are just the whales that made it to the beach as dead animals. We don't have a good index of one dead animal on the beach, how many really died and sank at sea and never did float to the beach. So these are, again, minimum estimates, but they're pretty telling. For example, NOAA has this graph on their website. The black bars are the 18-year stranding average for gray whales, and for the months of January on the left through December on the right. And you can see that in 2019, the orange bars, in 2020, the 18-year average was greatly exceeded. And that's what triggered the unusual mortality event investigations. Here's a comparison with that turn of the century mortality event, 1999 to 2000, the blue bars. You can see that it was a more severe event than the current 2019-2020 stranding event. But as a comparison, you can still see the spikes occur during a period of time when the whales are migrating out of their breeding range toward the higher latitudes for their summer feeding range, which would be March, April, May, June through July. So it's the animals are leaving the winter range is when the stranding seemed to peak during these events. And that's raised a lot of questions, which started us wondering, what could be behind this sort of thing. Well, looking at our data from San Ignacio and Bahia Magdalena leading up to the 2019 and 2021 UME, the first thing we noticed were low calf counts beginning in 2018 through the current year, 2021, and also an increase in the numbers or the percentage of skinny or flaca whales that look malnourished or emaciated. And that didn't make any sense because coming off of the summer feeding, when they arrive in Baja California, they should be at their fattest. They have the highest energy stores, having spent the entire summer's feeding to overwinter. But here's what we were seeing. Again, here's the counts from San Ignacio Lagoon. The green is 2016 and 2017 for mother calf pairs. And the typical counts before 2018 were anywhere from 70 to sometimes over 100 mother calf pairs, female calf pairs in San Ignacio Lagoon during the season. But then in 2018, it's like the floor fell out of the system. We saw little more than 20 during the 2018 winter, even fewer in 2019 or 2019, and even fewer than that in 2020. And this year is the lowest that we've seen in the 4 years running. You can see that we barely had more than 20 mother calf pairs in the lagoon the entire winter long. So one of our researchers, a student, Randy Calderon, decided to take a look at body condition, these emaciated whales, to see what percentage there were in the population, what we were seeing, and if that might give us a hint as to what's going on. Following her was Floreza Razon and Sergio Martinez, who picked up the work that Arandi started. And from 2018 to 2021, they analyzed the digital photography that we had. And the system they used was developed by Amanda Bradford and Dave Weller for the Western population, where they had a skinny whale issue over there. And the way they evaluated body conditions, they took three key physical characteristics: the postcranial cranial region right behind the blowholes. They looked at the dorsal flank to see if it was in good condition. And they also looked at the area above the flippers where the scapula protrudes if the animal is not in good condition. And so using this, they would assign a score to each of the photographs that they looked at. For example, on the left here, if the head was in good condition here, it received a 3. If it was in average condition or fair condition, it received a 2. And if it was in showing signs of emaciation, as at this picture at the bottom, you can see this is the base of the skull, and there's no fat at all behind that, leading to the spinal column. It received a 1. And similarly with the scapular region, if the scapula was showing, it received a 1. If it looked normal, they received a 2. And then the flank, if it was a convex flank, a nice robust flank, it received a 2. And if it was a concave with the distinct spinal column showing, it received a 1. So using these scores, they were able to categorize the condition of the whales based on our digital photography. Here's an example of a normal condition following summer feeding. This animal is fat. It's healthy looking. There's no depression behind the blowholes. You can't see the base of the skull. The flanks are nice and convex and rounded and plump. So that's a healthy animal. Now the whales aren't feeding in the winter, so you expect them to lose some food. There's no food for them to feed on. You expect them to lose some weight. And so, but that's acceptable after 3 months of being on a fast, especially if you're busy trying to breed or take care of a calf, you're going to lose some weight. So we can see the scapula in this animal, although it's acceptable, is starting to show a little bit right here. The flanks are not quite as rounded as they would be in normal condition. The extreme, though, is a skinny whale. Now let me try and describe what we're looking at. This whale is swimming away from us. These are the blowholes up here at the top. The right eye is visible right here. And this big bump that you see is the base of the skull. Now in a healthy animal, this we saw is all covered with fatty tissue all the way back here to the spine, but it's missing, it's not there. What we see is a protruding spinal column, a concave body flank, and this is actually a swelling of the abdomen. So this animal is in very, very poor body condition. Here's another picture of it coming towards us. Again, here are the blowholes. Here's the right eye. You can see the base of the skull declines. There's no fatty tissue behind the skull. And you can see the spinal column here and the swollen abdomen on its right side here. So these are alarming pictures that we were seeing of the number of skinny whales. Here's a flank from left to right on the top and from right to left on the bottom, and you can see the protruding spinal column. So here's the data that Randy and Flora and Sergio put together. Randy looked at 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011, and these are females with calves. And we can see that most of them are in the orange bars. They're predominant. They're in pretty good shape. When Flora and Sergio started the second analysis, 2018 to 2021, we can see there's and still, there's about equal number of fair condition, which you'd expect fasting after 3 months and taking care of nursing a calf, but still they're looking in pretty good shape. But when we start to look at single animals, this is what got our attention. Again, Randy's work in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, poor condition animals here in the white columns, are averaging around 6.5%, 6% each year. In 2018, we saw it jump to 8.2%. In 2019, the poor condition increased to 23.6% of our photographs of animals. 2020, it reached 30% if I can point to that, yeah, 30%. And this past year, we're at almost 24.5% of animals in poor condition in the Laguna San Ignacio. Similar results came from the data from Bahia Magdalena. In 2018, 2019, the poor conditions weren't too bad. 2020, they weren't too bad for females with calves. This past year, we saw the first increase in the southernmost area of Bahia Magdalena with poor condition females with calves. The single whales almost are a blueprint or a duplicate of what we see in Laguna San Ignacio in 2018, 24% poor condition, 41% in 2019, and 2020, 38%, and in 2021. So we were seeing an increase in animals that were in very, very poor body condition when they should be in excellent body condition after finishing a summer of feeding, migrating south to breed. Now, the evaluation of condition from the photography using numerical scoring system was okay, but it can be a bit subjective, and it's only as good as the quality of the photographs that you have to analyze. So we were looking for a more precise method for measuring and evaluating body condition. So enter the drones. What we need is some Star Wars music here, Brian. I don't know if you've got any you could play, but ta-da, 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 in come the drones. Two of our colleagues, Frederick Christensen and Lars Bader, developed a methodology with southern right whales off Australia and later humpback whales to originally look at the energy efficiency of convergence of energy from a lactating female to her calf as the calf grows and as she obviously shrinks as she uses up her body energy. Well, in doing so, they were able to develop a methodology for evaluating what it takes for a breeding female to be healthy and to successfully produce a calf and then nurse it and ultimately wean it on its own by looking at body condition. So they were eager to come to San Ignacio Lagoon. We transferred the technology to our staff there. Our two drone pilots that are leading the project to date are Fabian Rodriguez from La Paz, Mexico, and Fabian Vavir, who is from France. Now, the problem we had was if you said, hey, Fabian, and tried to ask a question, you're never sure which Fabian you were going to hear from, either Fabian Rodriguez or Fabian Vavir. So we had to give them names. So we dubbed Fabian Rodriguez, Fabian Uno from Mexico, and Fabian Vavir, Fabian Deux from France. And so that way we could tell them apart and we could talk to the people we needed to talk to. So here's some examples of the imagery that they are using. On the top, we have a very healthy looking classic torpedo-shaped chubby gray whale. This is what we would normally see coming off the feeding season in the summer, in the winters are arriving in the lagoon. Whereas the bottom picture shows you a skinny whale or a flaca whale that's emaciated. Again, we can see, if I can get my pointer here, the flippers are against the flank right here, and this ridge here is the scapula protruding, another one down here on this side for this flipper. We see the concave body flank, the swollen abdomen on each side, and of course, a very, very pronounced dorsal spinal column coming out of the top. So the methodology goes something like this. They take these high definition digital photographs, they divide the photographs into 5-degree segments, and then doing a little basic geometry, they'll calculate the volume of the whale based on 5% sections. And over time, if you rephotograph the same female with her calf, as the calf grows, she's going to shrink, or her condition is going to lessen as she loses energy to the calf, or transfers it to the calf. And also looking at non-breeding females, the single whales and males, you can look at their body condition by how emaciated they are using this approach. And sure enough, right away, looking at our first 3 seasons of this type of analysis, we were able to correlate poor body condition associated with the beginning of the 2019 mortality event that's continuing on today. And so here's kind of what we discovered. What we have here are plots of body volume on the vertical axis over body length, and you get a distribution like this. The red are the calves, the green are juveniles, the gray are adults, and the blue are the lactating females. If we put it on a log scale, it's a little easier to interpret. You can see as the whales grow, the calves grow, they start off on the skinny side. Oh, the black line is the average condition index for all of the sample, the entire database. So we can see that the calves start off when they're young and born on the skinny side, but they start getting fat very quick on, being fed on mom's milk, which is 60% butter fat. It's one of the highest in all mammals. And towards the end of their season, when they leave, most of them are migrated above the average condition index. The juveniles start off as small animals, still quite not sure maybe how efficient they are at feeding, and so they're below the average. But as they get longer and older, they start to migrate above the average condition. Similarly, with the adults, most of them are obliterated by the blue. I've got to look at a new way to plot this data so it's a little clearer. But the females that we saw in those pictures, even though they had a calf, they're all pretty much above the average body condition. So they figured out a way to balance their energy budgets while they're still lactating and taking care of a calf. So here's another way of looking at the data. Let's start over here on the left. The 0, 0 line across the horizontal line going across is that average body condition for the entire database. And we can see that calves in 2017, which are the gray numbers, 2018 are the red numbers, and 2019 are the blue numbers. They all start kind of either at the average or below the average when they're first born. But as the season progresses, they migrate into the more robust or better condition category as they're gaining weight and growing. If we look at their moms, it's just the opposite, which is what you'd expect. The moms aren't feeding, they're turning their body fat and energy stores into energy for the calf so it can grow. And so they start way above the average condition index. But as the season progresses, they approach the average as they're losing weight, transferring that to the calf as it grows. Where we see the skinny whales is again the juveniles. They start off in 2017 above the average condition index, but as the season progresses, in all 3 years, they decline below the average and we're getting skinnier. The same with the single adults, the males and the non-breeding females. We saw many of them cross over during the season, the average index, body condition index into a negative territory. Now down here at the bottom are those same measurements and a body condition index for stranded dead whales that have been examined during this mortality event. So we can see these two dotted horizontal lines that unless these animals can reverse course here and find some food or somehow solve the problem of becoming emaciated, they're headed for this strandings and they're going to run out of gas as they try to migrate north. And that's exactly what we're seeing during the northward migration in this mortality event. So what's going to become of our gray whales? We see healthy females giving birth to calves right alongside very, very skinny, emaciated whales in increasing percentages in the past 4 years. Well, the history of the population might give us some clues. NOAA has been keeping track or estimating the population of the northeastern Pacific gray whales from the Granite Canyon Laboratory just south of Monterey, where you folks are. And you can see that it's kind of a hectic course. It has rises and falls, rises and falls, rises and falls. Historically reached a peak in the late 1980s, whereupon there was a decline, but there's no records of mass strandings during this decline. So we're not sure if this is a mortality event or if it was, where did the stranded whales go? That's a mystery. They recovered, and then here's the turn of the century stranding event right here. They reached a peak in 88, and then 1999 to 2000, there was the mortality event and the population stabilized here at about 17,000, I think, from the peak of about 21 or 22,000 prior to the event. Over time, the populations increased again and reached a maximum of about 27,000 animals. And then the current mortality event has started, and it looks like the most recent census shows it has declined again. So there's this up and down history of the gray whale population, and it's all the factors that contribute to it are not well understood. They're an active area of research, obviously, great collaborations between oceanographers and climatologists looking at climate change effects and the whale biologists trying to understand how these may be driving some of these oscillations in the population. So what we can talk about possible sources of mortality. Ship strikes, gray whales migrate through major commercial shipping areas up and down the North American coast. And there are collisions, but not frequent enough to give us the stranding rates that we see in these unusual mortality events. There's also entanglement in fishing gear, because there's a lot of coastal fishing gear, and gray whales, particularly calves, get stuck in lines, nets, and floats as they migrate along the near shore. So this is true. This is a problem, but these incidents are not known to occur in numbers great enough, again, to equal what we're seeing in an unusual mortality event. That brings us to food limitation. Okay, if they're skinny and emaciated, there's either not enough food for them, or they don't have access to the food, or something's interfering with their ability to digest food or obtain food. And so climate change is becoming a huge suspect. We all are aware of the changes going on in the Arctic and the North Pacific, the warming of the waters, the changes in the climate, the loss of permanent and seasonal sea ice, which is the freshwater melt each spring that helps drive the primary production cycle in the higher latitudes. So this may be a basis for, disturbing a food chain that not only gray whales, but other marine life in the Arctic rely upon each year. And our colleagues tell us that bird populations are also suffering low reproductive rates. Killer whales that feed on migrating salmon are having a rough go of it because the salmon are declining, and so on. If you're a polar bear, there's no ice to go hunting for ice seals because there are no ice seals to be had. So there's stuff going on in the Arctic right now in our lifetime that's having some serious and very major ramifications for the marine life there. In the case of the gray whales, we're concerned that possibly the periodic increases and decreases that we saw in that graph of the population that NOAA has monitored over the years show in some years they may have exceeded the carrying capacity of the environment, or there are more whales than the environment can produce food enough to keep them all healthy. That's a possibility. As I mentioned, climate change could be limiting the production of the gray whale's food, or ice levels during heavy ice years may be preventing them from getting access to food in some of the traditional feeding areas. That's a possibility. Seasonal ice, could, even though there's food there, they just can't get to it. So if food's limited, their condition would be expected to decline. Hence, you may see emaciated whales that aren't able to reproduce normally, and they may become susceptible to disease and other malnutrition problems. So these are all active areas of investigation and ideas trying to piece together what's happening with the gray whales. However, I'd like you to consider something. Gray whales have survived over millennia. The fossil record shows us the modern gray whale that we know and see is at least 120,000 years that it's been around in the North Pacific. Its ancestors arose in what was then the Atlantic, what is now the Atlantic Mediterranean area. And then before the Panama separation, the isthmus separation between the Atlantic and the Pacific, they migrated into the Pacific. So the oldest fossil gray whales in the Pacific that we have date 1 million to 2 million years old, both from the Asian coast as well as the North American coast. So they've been around for a while and a chance to adapt to changing climates. The glacial advances in the Pleistocene ended 10 to 20 to 12,000 years ago. Sea level was much lower than it is at present. The continental shallow seas that the gray whales have adapted to efficiently feed on were not available at times, and they had to feed in deeper water and thereby compete with other cetacean species that were evolving. And of course, the current major feeding areas that were above sea level at those times, were blocked by the Bering Land Bridge, and they couldn't even get into the Arctic to feed. So the dynamics of the North Pacific has had an influence on how gray whales have been able to fare over the millennia and how they've adapted to specialize in particular feeding capabilities. They're very, very good at finding food if it's there. They're pretty much a generalist with a flexible feeding strategy, although they specialize and are adapted for bottom feeding on amphipods and ghost shrimp and other invertebrates. They can also suction feed, like a rorqual, on pelagic prey, swarming sardines, krill, mysid shrimp, other type of swarming prey that are off the bottom. They can also skim feed like a right whale. They can go through a school of krill or copepods and filter some of those out. Their baleen is not as efficient as that of a right whale, but it can still use that feeding method to augment their normal bottom feeding diet. So their ability to utilize alternative prey, they can switch feeding modes when they have to, and also locations, searching for food, is obviously contributed to their success over the time that they've been around. While we can't predict the future, we can just look to the skies and speculate on what the future will hold for gray whales. But based on their evolutionary history and their specific adaptations to a dynamic coastal environment, hopefully at the end of the rainbow, we'll still have gray whales to watch migrating up and down the coast of North America. Well, I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank all of our sponsors. Over the years, we've had a terrific community of institutions and individuals that make our research possible, help us to train students and feed all this information to the local communities and people like yourselves that are interested. Can't thank our researchers enough, especially all of our graduate students, for the work that they do and the hours that they put in. Special thanks to our 2021 teams that all came from La Paz, and with safety protocols in place, we're able to gather data this winter, the fourth winter of the UME that started in 2019. And if you'd like to reach out to us, our website is www.santignaciograywhales.org, and contact us. There's an email link there. We will respond to you and try and help you with questions or point you toward information that you're interested in. And we'd also encourage you to consider supporting our program so that we can continue to do this. We are a nonprofit sponsored through the Ocean Foundation. And if you go to that same website to our donate page, you can safely and securely make a contribution to help our research continue. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope this has been of interest to you. And if we have some time, Brian, I'll be happy to try and field some questions.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. So for everyone, if you have any questions at all, feel free to put it into the chat. That's on the bottom part of your Zoom function. So feel free to put in to the chat. Make sure it's for everyone, so then we can I can do a hosting and allow us to talk with Stephen. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to go in there. So I have not a question, but it says, wow, excellent and informative talk. Thank you, William Gold from Wisconsin. So we have some people from all around the world say thank you.
Oh yeah, gray whales are popular.
So one question that I have as people start to put in their question into the chat, when it comes down to gray whales, what drove you to do research on them? What was the main thing that was like, I want to research gray whales?
Well, basically, I moved to San Diego after my first round of graduate studies, looking for a job. And I took a job at SeaWorld in San Diego as an educator. And so I got to learn all about cetaceans and pinnipeds from people, the curators there that took care of them, that knew their health needs, their nutritional requirements, their biology, behavior, and so on. And I met a whale trainer there named Mary Lou Jones. And we started going to Baja to look at the gray whales migrating past San Diego down into Mexico, because we had heard that they aggregated in the lagoons. So we became very interested in them. At the time, there was a controversy about US tourists, early ecotourism, going into the lagoons and disturbing the breeding whales. And that would have been, of course, a violation of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And so, long story short, nobody was looking at what was going on in San Ignacio Lagoon, tourist-wise or whale-wise. And so we were associates with the San Diego Natural History Museum, and Dr. Raymond Gilmore was a great mentor, as was Dr. Carl Hubbs and his wife, Laura, from Scripps Oceanographic Institute. And they said, if you guys will go down there on a recon, we'll make it happen. And they did. And so off we went to look at gray whales. We came back, and 6 years later, we completed a 5-year program with support originally from the IUCN WWF, and then over the years, many other agencies and groups helped us to finish out a 5-year program. So that's how we got started with gray whales. And frankly, we never lost interest in them. We continue to follow them to this day, obviously.
So I have a question from Jacqueline. So how old do gray whales get, and do we know what age they stop breeding?
Okay, the oldest gray whale that we have on record, unfortunately, was harvested in the 1960s out of Oakland, the Richmond whaling station there. And it was measured at about, well, I forget its length, I think it was 15 meters long. It was a female, and she was 80 years old, and she was pregnant when she was killed. So that's the oldest one we know of, and that's published by Rice and Woolman, Dale Rice and Alan Woolman, in their little monograph of 1971 on the whole analysis of all of those records from the whaling days of the US on gray whales. Now, I showed you an example of calculating the age of a living female gray whale based on looking at historical photographs and then recaptures of photographs currently. And with the assumption that they were 6 to 8 years old when they were first able to get to produce a calf, they may have been older. You then add the number of years between the first photograph of the animal historically and then the most recent one. Add that together, and we're finding the whales that are the females that are coming back to San Ignacio Lagoon are ranging in the 40 to 50 year range, still alive. If they can live to be 80 years old, they've still got a number of reproductive years ahead of them. In cetaceans, there is no senescence. As best we know, the physiologists tell us that the female cetaceans in general, and gray whales in particular, will continue to breed until they die.
Okay. And then I apologize for butchering the name. Guillaume, are gray whales hunted anywhere?
There are some hunts that are managed by the through the International Whaling Commission to the Russian native communities off of Kamchatka and northern areas, feeding areas. I think they have a quota of somewhere around 100 animals per year can be taken for subsistence purpose. The US Inupiat Eskimos also have a license to take gray whales, but they focus on bowhead whales because it's a cultural tradition for them to go after the bowheads. And again, the IWC manages that subsistence hunt. And of course, you've probably read the papers. The Macaw tribe in Washington State has been petitioning to exercise their cultural heritage and to take a gray whale. To my knowledge, they have not done so yet, or maybe they took one. But that has been tied up in litigation for years and years and years, and we don't know where that's going to go. Other than that, there are no known legitimate harvests of gray whales. There are some incidental catches across the Western Pacific off Japan and Korea. The whales that just still migrate through there get hung up in coastal fishing gear, and waste not, want not, they usually end up in the fish market somewhere.
Bonnie's saying, thank you so much. What insight do you have about the gray whale off of Italy?
Ah, the gray whale off of Italy. Yes, yes. I told you they're good investigators. They're good at looking for food. And with the reduction in sea ice through the Northwest Passage, it's now been possible for some gray whales during the summer months to make their way over towards Greenland and enter the North Atlantic. This happened in 2010, and again, I think in 2013, there was a whale off of Israel that was photographed. It was a gray whale, and then off Spain. And then for the first time in historical days, a gray whale was photographed off Namibia, off Africa. So it crossed the equator and went into the Southern Hemisphere. And now most recently, we've got this Italian gray whale this gray whale running around Italy. What apparently has happened is in the summer months when they can get through the Northwest Passage, they fan out searching, looking for food. That's summertime, it's feeding time. And then if they're not careful, the seasons start to change and the passage starts to ice up and they can't get back. So they do what all good gray whales do. They go to the eastern shore and migrate south looking for a lagoon. And of course, you come to the Straits of Gibraltar in the Mediterranean, looks like a perfectly decent lagoon. So why not go in there? And people have been taking pictures of these animals. So it shows that they are able to travel. They're able to search for food and feeding areas. And we know from subfossil records and historical whaling records that there were gray whales in the Atlantic. They were whaled out by the Basque and the New England whalers in the 1700 time period. We also know from the fossil record that they used to migrate down the east coast of the United States as far south as Florida and the Carolinas, because they find subfossil and fossil gray whale bones in the marine deposits there. So they went extinct in the Atlantic. They persisted in the Pacific, and that's where they're known today. But there's no reason why, if the Northwest Passage is open, they can't move into the Atlantic again. Whether they can survive there, that's a big question.
So Mark is asking, were you at SeaWorld while JJ was there? That was the first gray whale I've ever seen when I was a kid.
Okay, well, no, I wasn't. I had already done my job and moved on to go back to college, to get into graduate school, and move on. The first captive gray whale was actually Gigi, and she was collected by the SeaWorld curators back in the days when you could do that sort of thing, and taken from Scammons Lagoon up to San Diego and raised for a year and then released. And she was radio tagged, but then never heard from again. And then JJ was the next one. A good friend and colleague, Jim Sumich, spent a lot of time. His interests range widely, but he's really interested in physiology and growth of cetaceans. And if you look up Jim's book, it's called Escherichthus robustus, there's some great information in his little book on the growth and physiology and all of the information that they were able to glean from that captive JJ whale when she was at SeaWorld.
So Jacqueline is asking, some whales stay around Tofino year round. Is there a reason they aren't heading to Baja to breed?
There probably is, but we don't know why they don't migrate. There's also been some interesting things historically. One, I forget the exact year, Sue Moore would know. She's up in Seattle at the University of Washington. She's a marine bioacoustician, among other things. And she recorded gray whale calls in the middle of winter up off of Alaska. And then some of you that are probably my age can remember the whales that were trapped in the ice off of Alaska. And there was a joint Russian-US effort to try and free those animals. And they tried cutting holes in the ice, and apparently they finally did disappear, so they got out. So for some reason, some of the whales either get trapped up there or they just don't migrate. The reverse is true of this northwest feeding aggregation, and a subgroup within that called the Sounders that I mentioned the Cascadia Collective has been looking at. They don't go further north apparently in the summer. They feed all along the areas in Puget Sound, and they are able to get enough food there. And again, the photographic identification shows it's many of the same individuals coming back year after year rather than migrating all the way to the higher latitudes to feed. So within the population, there's always some exceptions, and these are the exceptions that are fascinating because you try and figure out why.
I have another question from Patricia. It says, can you address the recent gray whale strandings in San Francisco Bay, or why there's a good amount of them specifically in the San Francisco Bay?
It's one of the symptoms of the emaciated whales that for one reason or another are not recharging their batteries, so to speak. They're not getting enough food to replenish their fat stores by the time they leave the summer range and go south to Baja. When we see them down there and they're very skinny, we looked at all those graphs of the body condition analyses, that if they don't start feeding, they're going to run out of gas and end up as a stranded whale. Well, gray whales, again, are good at finding food. And San Francisco Bay has got a lot of mud on the bottom and a lot of invertebrates in it. And so they're presumably looking for something to eat because they're starving. And they'll stop at the Columbia River mouth, the big delta there. That's got a lot of invertebrates. I mentioned the Puget Sound areas. They'll go in there and find food. So they'll try and find food all the way back up the line. Presumably if they're going to make it to the higher latitudes, to the historical feeding areas or where the food's more abundant, just to try and recoup some of the energy that they've lost during the winter months. So that seems to be the reason why they're entering Ensenada Harbor. They're entering, the Monterey Bay area, Los Angeles, and so on. Wherever there's an opportunity where they may be able to find some food, they'll try and check it out and then move on to the next likely spot.
So, Ray Holt is asking if there are currently 21,500 or so, why are there so few of them being seen in the lagoons? Where are they if they are not in the lagoons during the breeding/birthing period of the year?
This was a question that came up many, many years ago and was a conundrum for a long time until we actually started looking outside of the lagoons to see where the whales might be. And we discovered some interesting things. Number one, the NOAA researchers that do the census at Granite Canyon, just south of Monterey, they look at the southbound migration, and that's where they do the raw counts, and then they do a lot of statistical analyses for daytime, nighttime travel, speed, group size, observer bias, blah, 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 and come up with an estimate. Well, one of the things they noticed right away was as the last of the southbound migrants, because it takes, a couple of months for the whales to go by, the last of the southbound migrants, they were encountering northbound whales, passing them. So it appeared that the entire group was turning back on itself. While the last arrivals were arriving in the winter range, some of them were leaving the winter range and migrating north to get to the feeding grounds. They also discovered, and many of us that studied gray whales in the Channel Islands area, in San Diego and in Baja, that the gray whales during the winter range actually is from Point Conception, if you want to draw a line, all the way south to Cabo San Lucas and then into the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California as well. I mentioned that the bays out in front of Scammons Lagoon, Vizcaíno Bay, it's full of whales. It's an aggregation area. Bahia Ballenas in front of Laguna San Ignacio is another aggregation area. And Bahia Magdalena outside of the barrier islands there are also places where the gray whales gather. And with the advent of drones, we're now able to get out there safely as opposed to flying a small plane that would sink if you had to land in the water. We're able to start gathering data on the actual numbers and distributions of the whales. So the ones inside the lagoon are just a fraction of the overall population. The whales are scattered, like I said, from Point Conception all the way to Cabo San Lucas. But by counting the whales in the interior of the lagoons, we learn how they're utilizing those areas, okay? What the seasonality is when they arrive, when they depart, when the peak is, when the calves are being born and show up. And it also tells us about the use of those areas each year from winter to winter, and then we can take a look at good years and lean years and try and correlate that with environmental factors and so on. So, they're not all in the lagoons. That's a minimum estimate that gives us an index of what's going on in those habitats. But it's not a population estimate like the NOAA census off of Granite Canyon, where they're actually doing an estimate of the entire population as it moves from north to south.
Wow, good to know. Dan's asking, do they or can they remember their way back? I'm guessing when they get lost on the Atlantic side, or even when they're doing their migration.
From those in the Atlantic that have been photographed, apparently not. They either can't find their way back, or as I mentioned, they waited too long and the Northwest Passage started to ice up with winter and they can't get through. So they're stuck in the Atlantic for better or for worse. Now, there's the 3 whales that we know of that have been documented photographically. There are probably some others that have not been seen, that made that same trip, but they just unfortunately disappeared. That was their demise. So again, there's not, we don't know what food they may find, and they don't know that could sustain them in the Atlantic like they do in the North Pacific. So that's the best we can say. As far as the migration along North America, and presumably those whales in the Western population that still migrate along the Asian coast, they seem to follow the leader. The mothers, the females that have a calf, escort that calf because it's nursing all the way their first northward trip up to the feeding areas where they then separate. And then when the migration, when the climate changes, they showed them all funneling out of the shallow continental seas and back down the migration. This brings the whales together for mating, for breeding, as opposed to being scattered out over the feeding grounds. And they seem to follow the same route. Now, I mentioned Ray Gilmore was a very great mentor and really encouraged a lot of gray whale research. He was curious about why in modern days, the predominance of the gray whales passing through the Channel Islands and off of Catalina and San Clemente Island pass on the outside, the western coast of those islands, rather than on the inside or the Los Angeles side of the islands. And then he went out into great lengths to document that. And it appeared, and he proposed that basically they're following the underwater mountain ranges, that those islands are the tallest peaks that are still visible as sea level has risen and fallen. You can see the terraces on Catalina and on San Clemente and on the Channel Islands, where the old shorelines, eroded the coast and created a terrace, and then the sea level dropped and then established itself at a new level. So during periods of time, we talked about the sea level being below the continental shelf edge. Those islands, we know, were connected to the mainland. The fossil mammoths and human remains of ancient native cultures are found on Santa Rosa and Anacapa Island and Santa Cruz Island and off of Catalina and also San Clemente. So those at one point were connected to the mainland, and the whales couldn't pass on the eastern side of the islands. They had to pass on the western side. So Ray proposed that this was like some sort of a cultural memory. If they are learning the route and learning where it's good to go to aggregate to breed, as well as where it's good to go to feed, they all passed on the western side, or the majority of them passed on the western side of the islands rather than the eastern, because the eastern was a no-go during periods of low sea level. And so that was Ray's theory. And I think that's a real interesting thing to ponder. You should think about that. There's some interesting papers by the humpback whale research community about fidelity to feeding areas in the North Atlantic, and I believe in the North Pacific as well. And they have a similar hypothesis that humpback whales, when their calves follow their mom to specific feeding areas, and they learn that route, and they return as subadults and adults to those same feeding areas. So that'll send you off to the literature search on the internet and look up some of those humpback whale papers. They're fascinating.
Wow, that's blowing my mind right now to really think about that with other species as well. I think I'm gonna just do a couple more questions and let you go, since you're on the East Coast and it's getting late for you. So I'm going to pick Audrey's question. It says, how would you explain the friendly behavior in gray whales in Mexican lagoons? Is it curious behavior towards humans? And then she's also saying she has summer feeders in Oregon, where she lives in Depot Bay.
Okay. If you go to our website, we have a written up explanation, or our view, our take, our analysis of the friendly whale, or Mysteriosus whales in Laguna San Ignacio and elsewhere, as to why that happens. And the short answer is the current generation of whales that we have were never hunted. Okay, that all of that hunting and pursuit took place more than 150 years ago. So the whales that are alive today have never been threatened by people in boats. They come into the lagoons, and the tourists there, the eco-tourists, are eager to see them, but they don't harass them. Those of you that have visited the lagoons, you understand that the guides that operate the boats are extremely skilled and very knowledgeable, because many of them grew up in those areas. They know the whales, they know the lagoons, and they know that if you pursue a whale, it will run. If you go out and place yourself in the presence of whales, chances are they'll get curious and come over and take a look at you. Now, in that context, the whale watching boats are a benign component of the ecosystem there, just like everything else at the lagoon. The boats don't bite them, that doesn't chase them, it doesn't hurt them. And mammals in general are curious about their environment, and they'll investigate things, particularly young animals that are experiencing the world for the first time. So we're talking about calves that are one of the more frequent friendly whales that are encountered by ecotourists in the lagoons. If the mother will allow the calf to go over and look at a boat, they will. And they'll come over and swim around the boat and wonder why it's making all that noise. The sound of the motor, which is never shut off, is producing a low frequency rumbling sound that's in the same hearing range of the gray whale, in the same vocalization range as the gray whale. So they can hear the motor. And if you can imagine, the fiberglass boat is like a stereo speaker cone, with the motor being the magnet that's generating the vibration. So the boat is emanating low frequency sounds. You know, and if that's not curious enough for a young whale to go investigate, I don't know what would be. It says, why is what is that thing, and why is it making the same sounds that we make, you know? So they'll go over and investigate. And of course, if you've been to an oceanarium or you've been around, you know, domesticated marine mammals, they love to be petted. They're very tactile. Young whales are in constant contact with their mom because that's security, that's a food. Someone's showing you where to go and how to go there. So this rubbing during breeding and during the growth of a young calf is a very, very important tactile sensation for their development. And so like a puppy, if it comes over the boat and you start rubbing it on the head, it's going to come back for more. And so all of these individual factors, we believe, create like a perfect storm as far as they're not afraid, they're curious, you know, and they just are willing to come over and take a look at the boats. Now, I'll have to say it's a minority of the whales. I can't put a firm number on the percentage, but I'll just throw out 90% of the whales could care less about people in boats because their hormones are raging. They're either there to breed, to mate with each other, or to take care of a calf they just gave birth to, and they really don't want to bother with a boat full of people, okay? But there's a few that are curious enough to come over to the boats. And again, photographic identification has demonstrated for us that many of the females that will bring their calves or allow their calves to come over to a boat and investigate it are repeat offenders. They've been doing this for years. They know the drill, and they're not afraid. They're not threatened. And I think that's why it persists over time. So that's my take on it. Go to the website. You can read our analysis on it. We'd love to hear your comments. If you've got some other ideas, that's terrific. Love to hear them.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Stephen. I know it's late for you, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to go to the website and contact them there. Thank you so much. So what was the website URL again, if some people are asking?
It's easy to remember, www.sanignaciograywhales.org. Take you right to the webpage, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Go for it.
I just want to say again, thank you to ACS Monterey Bay chapter for the opportunity to participate in your webinar series. It's been a thrill for us, and for me especially, to be able to share all this information, let everyone know who we are, the kinds of things we're learning, and how we're trying to interpret how the environment and the gray whales are interacting. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. One last thing that I like to kind of end the presentation with is there any information or suggestions or tips to anyone who wants to help out with research, or young researchers or graduate students who want to get into your line of work? Any tips or tricks for them?
Be persistent.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of opportunities, but there are opportunities, particularly for young, motivated people. We demonstrate that to ourselves every winter when we have at least 3 or 4 returning graduate students as part of our research team. And we always mix that up with some newbies, some first-year people, because they've expressed an interest in marine science, maybe making a career of it. And this is a chance for them to get wet, to get dirty. And we support them for 6 months, 3 months in the field season, and 3 months when they return to their universities for analysis and report writing. So this means that they're basically employees of the project. And as graduate students, they want to finish their degrees and get good marks. And it's just a real joy to work with extremely bright, motivated young people. It's fantastic. And so if you're interested at all in marine science, with any species or any aspect of marine biology, just stick to it. Be persistent. talk to people, go to meetings, meet researchers, find out what they're doing, if they're interested, if there's opportunities to join a research team seasonally or whatever. Don't say no. Even if there's no financial return, the experience alone will be valuable for your career and your development. So yeah, hang in there, be persistent.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great night, and hopefully we'll see you all soon in our next month's meetings or in the future. So have a great night, everyone. And thank you so much for having just a great presentation.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.